Hi everyone. Today this lesson is going to focus on the special education classification of emotional disturbance. The lesson will go over the definition, frequency and prevalence, steps for evaluation, impact on learning in the classroom, and strategies for teachers and other professionals working with a student with emotional disturbance. I'm going to be referring to it as ED throughout my presentation. Emotional disturbance, or ED, is one of the 12 categories under the IDEA, which we all know by now is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and it's a federal law that requires schools to serve the educational needs of eligible students with disabilities. Specifically, ED is defined as a condition exhibiting one or more of the following over a long period of time and to a marked degree, and that adversely affects a child's educational performance. The first one is an inability to learn that cannot be explained by intellectual, sensory, or other health factors. This means that the child is not learning despite appropriate instructional strategies, interventions, and other support services. The next one is an inability to build or maintain satisfactory interpersonal relationships with peers and teachers. This means that the child displays physical or verbal aggression when others approach them. They have a lack of affect or a disorganized or distorted emotions towards others. They demand for constant attention from others, and they may withdraw from social interactions. The next one is inappropriate types of behavior or feelings under what is normally considered a normal circumstance. This means that the student's reactions or feelings differ significantly from expectations for that student's age and gender. The next one is a general pervasive mood of unhappiness or depression. And the next one, finally, is a tendency to develop physical symptoms or fears associated with personal or school problems. So something to note about ED is that it's totally normal for children to exhibit these symptoms, some of them throughout their developmental period, but what is different is that students with ED would display these symptoms more excessively and over a long period of time. So now moving into characteristics of children with ED. Of course, each student with ED will display different individual characteristics just depending on how it affects them and depending on the kind of person they are, but they will all probably share deficits in emotional, behavioral, and cognitive development. So some of the more common characteristics include hyperactivity, which is characterized by a shorter attention span and impulsiveness, aggression or self-injurious behavior, which is exhibited by acting out or fighting, withdrawal, which is just not interacting socially with others, and they may have an excessive fear or anxiety, immaturity, which is exhibited by inappropriate crying, temper tantrums, or poor coping skills, and finally, learning difficulties, which is just academically performing below their grade level. Another interesting contributing factor to emotional disturbance can be found in deficits in communication. An estimated 71% of students with emotional disorders also have expressive and receptive language disorders that impact their ability to understand and communicate with peers and adults. And there's also a more serious emotional disturbance category, which is exhibited by just an exaggerated version of everything that I've mentioned previously, like distorted thinking, excessive anxiety, and more bizarre motor acts and abnormal mood swings. Also, emotional disturbance is an umbrella term for a number of different mental disorders. So a lot of disorders that we know and we have learned about can fall under that umbrella term of ED. So some of the ones that fall under it are anxiety disorders, bipolar disorders, conduct disorder, eating disorders, OCD or obsessive compulsive disorder, and psychotic disorders. Moving into causes, no one really knows the actual cause of ED, but factors like heredity, brain disorders, diet, stress, and family functioning can all be related. And as we all know, mental disorders, all these things do not discriminate based on ethnicity, income, religion, ethnicity. I already said that. It doesn't matter. Anyone can be affected. Frequency and prevalence. According to the CDC, approximately 8.3 million children aged 4 to 17 have parents who have talked to a healthcare provider or a school staff member about their child's emotional or behavior difficulties, and nearly 2.9 million children have been prescribed medication for these difficulties. And in the 2003-2004 school year, I know that's pretty dated, but it was the most recent that I could find information on. About 484,000 children received services based on ED diagnosis, and it was noted that within that group that there were far more African American students diagnosed than white students. So that was an interesting fact. Moving into evaluating a student for ED. So when the child study team wants to evaluate a child who they suspect may have ED, some of the important things to include in an evaluation would be a direct assessment of the student, which would involve clinical interviews, play-based assessments, personality tests, student self-reports. Also, it's important to observe behavior in multiple settings. Take a psychosocial history, which would include a family background. Assess their educational progress, which would be collecting their past work and past grades, taking a health assessment, and other possible specialized assessments like medical, psychiatric, occupational, or speech and language assessments. Obviously, ED can have a significant impact on learning and in the classroom. So teachers and paraprofessionals are key in noticing the behaviors that could be displayed in a classroom. It's important for them to do two things, which are to notice patterns and measure the frequency. So noticing patterns would mean to take notice to events that precede a specific behavior, and measuring the frequency would be taking notice to and documenting the number of times a certain behavior occurs. So things to notice specifically in the classroom setting are a lack of success on assignments, and it was found that the common deficits for children with ED are in math and spelling, so just taking notice to that. And it's important to note that students with ED can be at any level of cognitive functioning, but most are at low or average intelligence and achieve below their grade level in all academics. Noticing continuous problems with peers and adults. Students with ED usually have a coexisting learning disability, and also affecting the learning of other students in the classroom. So noticing if a student's hyperactivity or aggression or any of the other characteristics that I mentioned above that are associated with ED are affecting the learning of other students. So in the district that I work in, there is a school that has a class specifically for students with ED, which is really great, but it's obviously not realistic in all situations. A lot of the time, students with ED and other disorders are kept in general education classrooms, so I just included some strategies for teachers who have an inclusive classroom. Teachers need to be careful because the more difficulty a student has in the classroom, the more the maladaptive behaviors will surface. So allowing students choose between classroom tasks, consistent praise, keeping class rules and activities simple and clear are really important. A lot of the times students with ED will struggle with long lists and complicated rules, so keeping that at a minimum, like 3 to 5 tasks or rules at a time. Rewarding positive behavior is really important. Children with ED can take discipline as a personal attack and can learn very little from it, so it's really important to focus on the positive. Allowing for mini breaks. Students with ED can lack emotional balance and may just need that extra time to take a break to help them remain focused throughout the day. So students who are eligible for special education services under the category of emotionally disturbed may have IEPs that include psychological and counseling services in or outside of the school, so it's important for school counselors to know how to work with students with ED. Trust can be a very large issue for these children because of their lack of knowing what it's like to form relationships with people. So forming a relationship that's built on empathy, trust, and respect can be a solution to many problem behaviors and can have a lasting impact on the emotional development of the child. And it's also important for counselors in the school and outside to focus on helping families understand their child's disorder. ED in particular is really complicated and has a lot to it, so it's important for families to understand what's going on with their child, and it's important for the counselors to be able to be there for them. And any educational programs for children with emotional disturbance need to include attention to providing emotional and behavior support, as well as helping them to master academics, develop social skills, and increase self-awareness, self-control, and self-esteem. And also, counselors can help with that too. They play a big role in helping students with self-esteem, self-awareness, and other social skills. So I wanted to observe the classroom in the school that was only for children with ED, but I couldn't this week. So I talked to a teacher who has a student with ED, specifically conduct disorder, in her classroom, in her inclusive classroom. So I talked to her about some of the challenges she faces, and she talked about how working in a classroom with any kind of student with a behavior disorder is one of the most challenging things she's ever had to deal with being a teacher. She learned that it's really important to get to know the child first as early as you can, especially taking note to their likes or dislikes, using their likes to their advantage, and understanding their dislikes so as to not provoke any negative behaviors unintentionally. The environment of the classroom, I learned, was really important. She said that things need to be put in their proper space, whether it's posters, decorations, or other eye-catching things that aren't necessarily a visual distraction, but they can trigger an idea or emotion that could set off a negative reaction. So you have to be really careful to not make your classroom too stimulating. She keeps her student right near her during instruction because her student tends to feed off other students during instruction and distracts them and needs to be constantly reminded to stay focused. So speaking with this teacher and her experience having a child with ED in her classroom really validated all the points that I discussed in this presentation. So that was really cool to be able to connect everything I learned to like a real life experience. And also the last thing in my presentation, I included a number of excellent organizations that can help support classroom instruction for students with emotional and behavior disabilities, and also organizations that help support families who have children with ED. And I don't want to go over all of them because it's pretty wordy, but I included them in my PowerPoint and in my handout that's attached on the discussion board. But as for emotional disturbance classification, that's pretty much it. I learned a lot researching it, and I hope you did too. So thanks for watching.